Welcome everyone, I am the Depressed Dior, and this is Arkham Horror, the card game. As you can see, I got some more scenarios up in front of us because we are doing Dunwich Legacy. So this campaign is 8 scenarios long and has kind of a unique start compared to our previous campaign. This video, I'm probably just going to talk about the investigators and and do the intro and pick a scenario, and then I'll probably break it there, just to kind of shorten some of this stuff a little bit. For anyone that's wasn't paying attention to the previous campaign, I'm playing this on easy, no taboo. Even though I'm playing with no taboo, I may avoid to use certain meta cards just out of just trying something different. Also, if you do have any rules corrections and stuff like that, do note I tend to record in bulk. So any feedback that you send my way, I'm probably not going to see for a while. In fact, as I'm recording this, I have yet to actually upload a single video of this series yet. So, with all that being said, we did pretty well. Made a couple of rules mistakes on the Night of the Zealot, though nothing too serious. Though it was pretty hilarious with the mistake I made on the final scenario, but it was to my detriment, and I still won. So, Jenny and Ursula did rather well. And this time around, we're going to be sending in Diana Stanley, the Redeemed Cultist, and Daisy Walker, the Librarian. I'll have the lead investigator be Diana for this, and let's go ahead and go over their stuff, and I'll talk about the decks I've made. Alright, so Diana Stanley is a mystic, which will be noted by a purple color. Mystics tend to be... I don't know really how to describe them. They're kind of like an all-rounder. They tend to focus a lot on spells, and those spells tend to do many of the same things that other roles do. Like there's spells that help with getting clues, spells that help murder things, and it tends to revolve around using the will stat quite a bit. So most mystics will have a rather high will stat, which is the head icon. As you can see, Diana does not follow that rule. She has a 1 in that stat. In fact, if you compare her to Jenny, she has less stats in total than Jenny. But she does have some mechanics to help with that. Anyway, there's one thing I didn't really mention on the previous campaign and with the previous investigators is investigators do in fact have keywords on them. Though from my experience so far, I've only seen one keyword even matter. So, in this case, we got Diana Stanley, who is a cultist in Silver Twilight. Her special ability is every card that's beneath her gives her +1 will. And then she has a reaction ability after a card you own cancels or ignores a card effect or game effect. If there are fewer than 5 cards beneath Diana Stanley, you can place that card face down beneath her and draw one. And as a result, you can also you'll draw 1 card and gain 1 resource. Limit is once per phase. So the keyword here is per phase. We had some abilities last. The Ursula's ability in the previous campaign was once per turn. So this one can actually be done multiple times depending on the timing timing windows you get throughout an entire round. She does have an Elder Sign effect, which is +2. And if she has a card beneath Diana Stanley, she can add it back into her hand. So, and then she has 7 and 7 for her health and sanity. So the way she kind of works is you generally want to have a deck that's full of a lot of cancels or ignore abilities on it, and then throw those under her card and eventually get her willpower up to 6, which 6 is very impressive. Let's go ahead and go to the back of her card. She has a deck size of 35. She has access to Mystic 0 to 5, Guardian 0 to 2, and Neutral 0 to 5. So this is generally a pretty common splash where you have 0 to 5 for your primary and then 0 to 2 of another class. Deck building requirements, she does have to have her Twilight Blade, which is her signature item, and then she has Dark Insight, which is her signature event, and then she has Terrible Secret as her unique weakness, and then of course she's going to have a random basic weakness. Additional setup, you begin each game with Dark Insight as an additional card in your opening hand. So you can see I already have it in my hand here. Dark Insight, it's an event, costs 2. Fast, play when an investigator at your location draws an encounter or a weakness, and you can cancel all of that card's effects and shuffle it back into the deck. You do not draw a new card to replace it. So right off the bat, no matter what, you'll always start each scenario with a cancel card in her hand. So that's pretty helpful. As for the flavor, we got as a new business owner in Arkham, Diana Stanley was proud to be inducted into the prestigious Silver Twilight Lodge. Her joy has since turned to dread. Her admittance into the organization was fantastic for business, but the weekly meetings have grown more and more disturbing. After witnessing strange rituals and terrible secrets, Diana has become suspicious of the lodge's true nature. Now she is convinced that there are terrible forces converging on Arkham, and that the lodge is somehow involved. Diana has resolved to take it down from the inside, regardless of the cost. Alright. So, as for our deck, we'll go ahead and search. So I have a mixture of... She has access to Guardian, and she has access to Mystic. Obviously, the Mystic stuff tends to not be very effective in the start, because she only has one will. She does have 3 Fist, which is about as good as Jenny's, so she can kind of fight, but it's not something she can primarily do. So a lot of the decks that you tend to see with Diana tend to be a mix, where you have some Guardian cards, which tend to be like guns and weapons and other weapons, to kind of hold her while she's trying to get her stuff underneath her card. I believe in most references they call this the basement. So I'll probably use that as the reference in the future. So anytime you put a card underneath it, I'll be saying that I'll be putting the card in her basement. And the idea is to get cards into her basement and then get her will high enough to use the fancy spell she has access to. Much like Jenny, I found myself in the situation where every time I made a deck that kind of did both roles, Mystic and Guardian, I ended up just not being able to do either of them. So I did find a deck in Arkham DB that had kind of more of a focus on just the purely fighting stuff, and then the rest was kind of just getting the fighting stuff out, and then just, of course, getting a bunch of cancel cards. Speaking of, you need to have as many cancel cards as you can for Diana, because you want to use every opportunity to get those cards in the basement. Not only for the willpower, but also it gets her resources and cycles through her deck faster. Granted, some of these cancels do have a cost to them, including the Dark Insight here, but it helps mitigate the cost quite a bit. Anyway, so she's going to have a mix of Guardian cards that kind of help her with fighting. I have a few weapons. I have some cards that help find those weapons, including Backpack, which we're already familiar with. I do have access to a few emergency caches, which also Backpack can get. Backpack level 0 is generally not very good. It can only get 6 cards, and it costs 2 instead of 1, but it is better than nothing. And then, besides those few Guardian weapons, everything else is pretty much cancels. I do have a couple Wolf Mask, also to help things out. She does have the Silver Twilight Blade, which is her unique weapon. It's a weapon that you can actually use either your fist or your willpower to attack with. It only does 1 damage, but it also has the special ability where you can actually play or commit cards from beneath Diana Stanley as if they were in her hand. So this is a way to kind of get more cancels out of your cards, essentially. But yeah, everything else here is essentially a cancel. Dark Prophecy cancels tokens. Delayed Inevitable cancels damage and horror. Deny Existence cancels a wide variety of things. Dodge cancels attacks. I do have a few Drawn in the Flames, which will help her, which can get her some free clues in exchange for an encounter card. And the idea, of course, is draw the encounter card and then try to cancel it. I also have Hypnotic Gaze, which cancels an attack. And then, let's see. Ward of Protection, of course, cancels a lot of treacheries, and that's kind of the gist of it. She does have some stuff to help with fighting. She has Vicious Blow. Then she kind of has some general skill cards to kind of work on anything. Take the Initiative is very good for the Mythos phase. Promise of Power is kind of good in general. And then as for weapons, right now she has some Survival Knives, which are very good weapons that can actually kill monsters on the enemy phase as a counterattack type thing. Also, I do have a Machete, but that's going to get replaced. I generally don't like using Machete because that's kind of a super staple Guardian card that's almost like in every Guardian deck, so I'd like to change it up a little bit. I intend on replacing this with a different weapon if I can survive long enough. She does have a unique weakness. What this does is if there's no cards underneath her or in the basement, it just shuffles back into the deck. Otherwise, each card in the basement, she either has to discard it or take 1 horror, and it can't be canceled. You can cancel the horror, but the horror is anything that says for each. It counts each instance of that as its own effect. So essentially, if you have 5 cards underneath you, you could potentially take 5 horror, but it's not actually taking 5 horror. It's taking 1 horror 5 times. This matters for things like Deny Existence, which can cancel horror damage, but it only cancels 1 instance of it. Besides that, her basic weakness is Haunted. What this does is it goes into her threat area, and it gives her -1 to all her skills, and then she can spend 2 actions to get rid of it. It's kind of annoying, but it's honestly not the worst thing. So yeah, generally, Diana's kind of just there to kind of get as many weapons out as possible to try to help back up her partner. She's going to kind of struggle for this first session, and I'm hoping I will get enough experience to get the weapon I want. Anyway, with all that said, let's go ahead and move on to our other character. We have Daisy Walker, who's a Seeker. The Librarian, she is Miskatonic. She has 3-5-2-2 as her stat line, so not much agility or fighting. She has a little bit of willpower. And then, of course, 5 book, which, as I said in the previous with Ursula, you generally want to have 5 book if you're going to be a Seeker and get all the clues. Her special ability is she can take an additional action each turn, but it only can be used to activate tome action abilities. So, of course, you generally want to have in your deck some tomes that can actually be activated. This was pretty decent when the game originally came out, and honestly, it's gotten better as more and more tomes come out. I believe around Scarlet Keys, they introduced a new tome that actually does investigation as part of its action. So essentially, if you get that book out, essentially your free action becomes another investigate. So being able to investigate 4 times is rather powerful. Her Elder Sign ability is actually pretty awesome as well. It's only +0, but if you succeed, she draws 1 card for each tome you control. In most cases, you'll probably have at least 1, and probably 2. In which case, you draw some cards, which is great. Did she have a... Oh, she did? Wow, Diana doesn't even have a quote. Daisy's quote, "I know of books so powerful they can rewrite reality." She has 5 health and 9 sanity, so don't let her take damage. Deck size is 30. Seeker cards 0-5, Mystic 0-2, and then she has neutral 0-5. So yeah, her splash gives her access to some of those fancy spells that you can mess around with. In most cases, you're going to generally use spell events rather than the actual spell assets. And then deck building requirements. She has to have her tote bag, which is her unique card. Necronomicon, which is her unique weakness. Note it's Necronomicon John D translation. There are multiple Necronomicon cards in this game. I believe there's at least 3 different ones. And then, of course, a random basic weakness. As a respected librarian of Miskatonic University, Daisy had always felt that books were the most important thing in her life. She explored in fiction what she had abhorred in life: horror, violence, fear. Then she stumbled across the John D translation of the Necronomicon. It was blasphemous, unholy, and too awful to be read. But given her studies in obscure and occult subjects, Daisy knew there was more truth than fiction within the book's pages. She began to wonder what other secrets the restricted collection of the Ornate Library held. Alright, as for her deck, so one thing to note, off to the side here, we have the Essence of Dream, which is a bonded card for the Dream Diary, which we'll talk about in a bit. But for right now, this doesn't really do anything until she gets it in her hand. The Shrewd Analysis, on the other hand, is a permanent effect. Anytime you upgrade an unidentified or untranslated subtitle, you may upgrade a second copy of that card at no experience cost. But if you do, you have to the 2 upgraded versions will be randomized amongst all the eligible options, and they have to meet all the deck building restrictions. So there was that book that I translated with Ursula. If I happen to have 2 of those in the deck, and I translate it, and then I choose to upgrade one of them, I can upgrade both of them for the cost of 1. But instead of choosing which one I want, it'll be randomized for both of them. This can potentially get you the same card twice, which can be a bit iffy if you get a card that you really don't want to mess around with. But for the most part, this kind of saves you a lot of XP, and it does kind of make the build a little interesting because you never know what you might get. I've done sessions where I've gotten things that help me heal, help me evade, and so forth, and it always ends up being reasonably beneficial. So, as for the deck itself, As you can probably expect, there's going to be a lot of tomes. So we have archaic glyphs, but unlike Ursula, I have 2 of them. Now the good news is, as long as I translate one of them, that will meet the requirement for both of them. So good stuff there. So there is an ally for Seekers that I haven't really been using. His name is Dr. Milan Christopher. He's a 4-cost ally that gives +1 book, and every time you successfully investigate, you will get 1 resource. With that card, you can generally pretty much get as many resources as you need, and you're just good to go. I tend to not use him because I want to try other allies and kind of shake things up. So that is part of the reason why I'm not using him in this deck. There's also a few other reasons. There are a couple allies that are actually really good for Daisy Walker, and you probably want to use them anyway. As for allies, I do have 4 of them. I have 2 art students, which all they do is when they come into play, they will automatically discover a clue for you. I generally use these as like free soak, as well as a free clue. And they only cost 2 to play. I have this Astounding Revelation. You can have 3 of these in the deck. I only have 1. Essentially what this does is anytime I search through my cards in my deck, if Astounding Revelation is among them, I can choose to discard it automatically and gain resources or a secret. This is pretty much just to go with my other ally, which is the Research Librarian. What he does is when he comes into play, I can search through my entire deck for a tome asset and add it to my hand, in which case I'm going through the entire deck, so it'll automatically trigger this guy, assuming I don't have him in my hand already. Speaking of, the Research Librarian is pretty much the key thing here. If I don't start with a book I want, I can definitely go and find it with a Research Librarian. As for other book options, I have 2 Dream Diaries. These are also things that can be that start untranslated and can be researched. These things essentially work well with this Essence of the Dream, which by itself just counts as a unexpected courage that you can constantly get back. But once you translate these things, it can actually make the Essence of the Dream even stronger. And then the final books I have is the Grim Memoirs, which is from the Scarlet Keys. It's the card I talked about earlier, where it can actually be used as an investigate action with Daisy Walker's ability. It's very helpful. It gives +2 to the investigation as well, and if you succeed by 2 or more, you may draw a card. The only restriction for this card is it has 4 secrets, and once it runs out of secrets, you won't be able to use it anymore. Besides that, I do have a Mouse Mask. I only have 1 of them in the deck. Everything else, I do have a couple shortcuts. I have an accessory that buffs both will and intelligence at the cost of sanity. And then I also have Strange Solution, which is another card that you can use to research. This thing can, by itself, doesn't do too much, but once you research it, it can do quite a variety of things, from healing to essentially being able to fight or evade. As for kind of the splash cards I have Promise of Powers, which are very similar to what I already talked about them. They get 4 wilds and very little drawback. Of course, I talked about the St. Hubert's Key. I do have String of Curses, which is a spell that does a parlay effect. Parlay does not provoke. If you use this against a non-elite enemy, you can choose one of the effects. You can either automatically evade it and put a doom on it, and then that enemy can't take damage for the remainder of the round, and you get a clue at your location. And then the other effect option is if the enemy already has doom on it, you can instantly defeat it and gain 1 resource for each doom on it. So if you have 2 String of Curses in your hand and 2 actions to spare, you can just kill something that's non-elite. And this can have a very significant impact on certain enemies that tend to be very, very bulky. This also is just a way to just kill cultists by herself, because cultists always spawn with like a doom on them, so she could just go over there and be like, all right, I kill you, get a resource out of you, and keep on going. She does have a few ward protections of her own, so she can also do some canceling of the Mythos if it comes up that way. Besides that, I'll go ahead and talk about her uniques. She has Daisy's Tote Bag, which is a non-slot item. When you play it, it will give you 2 additional hand slots that can only be used to hold tomes. For the most part, I do not ever play this card. I usually just use it for the skill tokens, or the skill icons on the left side. Because honestly, I don't really need that many books. I know I have 6 of them, but soon I'm not going to... these archaic glyphs are going to turn into spells eventually. And for the Dream Diary, I only need 1 of them out. And then the Grim Memoir, I really only need 1 out at a time. Her unique weakness is the Necronomicon, John D. translation. When this comes out, it comes straight into play. It'll start with 3 horror on it, and it can't leave as long as it has horror on it. It takes up a hand slot, which can be a bit annoying. The special effect is it'll treat the Elder Sign as a auto fail, which can be pretty devastating because that essentially means you have twice as many chances of getting the auto fail. And then as an action, you can move a horror from the Necronomicon to Daisy, and eventually, if there's no horror on it, you can discard it. So if you have nothing better to do with your spare tome action, you can always use this to kind of gradually get rid of this thing. Like I said, the biggest issue is usually if you have both your hand slots filled and you draw this, you're going to end up discarding one of your books. And then her basic weakness is the Stubborn Detective. While it's a 3/2/2, its prey is bearer only. So the way prey works is it by itself generally acts as a tiebreaker. So if there's ever a situation where it has hunter and it hits equal distance from two people, if prey applies to one of those 2 targets, it'll go after that target. Same thing in a situation where it happens to be on top of a location with 2 investigators or more investigators. It'll aggro. It will engage the one that it has prey on. Now, in the situation where it says for prey or it says only, that means no matter what, the Stubborn Detective will not automatically engage anyone else. So in this case, this guy will just continuously go after Daisy Walker. While the Stubborn Detective is in her location, it doesn't even have to be engaged. It treats your investigator as if his or her printed text box were blank, except for traits. So this is pretty dangerous. For Daisy, it's bad, but it's not the end of the world, because at worst it just means she can't use her tome ability action. But this also affects anyone else that happens to be in the same location. And in the case of Daisy, even if Daisy had 5 cards in her basement and she should have 6 will, while this guy is out and she's there, her will goes back down to 1. So it can definitely be very dangerous. Now, one thing to note about this guy is he is not elite. So worst case scenario is you can string curses him twice and then kill him that way. Also, he doesn't really hit that hard. He only does 1 damage, which is still pretty dangerous for Daisy since she only has 5 health. Anyway, that's everything for that. So let's go. Let's do some book reading. So their hand is at your throats, yet ye see them not. I'm going to burn this accursed diary, and if you men are wise, you'll dynamite that altar stone up there, and pull down all the rings of standing stones on the other hills. Things like that brought down the beings that those Watleys were so fond of. All right, so we'll go through the steps here. I am going to set it to easy, but I can't do it right now. We're going to go straight into the prologue. All right. Dr. Henry Armitage pours himself a glass of Pinoy? I don't know how to pronounce that. And sits down on his desk, gesturing for you to sit across from him. I apologize for the short notice, he begins. His face is pale, his forehead sweaty and wrinkled with worry. Armitage, the head librarian of Miskatonic University and a former mentor of yours, privately contacted you in hopes of gaining your assistance. Eager to help, you made your way to his home in Southside. Upon entering, you were surprised to find his home in disarray. Books and notes litter his desk, and an empty bottle of wine was tipped over onto the ground by the fireplace. You'd always known Armitage to be neat and well organized. The elderly man takes a moment to collect his thoughts. I am looking for 2 of my colleagues, Dr. Francis Morgan, Professor of Archaeology, and Warren Rice, Professor of Languages. Warren was supposed to meet up with me over supper earlier today to discuss several important findings, but he has since gone missing. At first I thought nothing of it, but I have a nagging feeling something else is going on, a very familiar feeling. You've never seen Armitage quite this worried before. His hands tremble as he reaches for the glass on his desk and he sips from it nervously. I tried to find Francis, hoping he knew where Warren was, but he too is out of touch. Francis has been spending a lot of time in some gambling den, or so I'm told. I sent you because I am worried Warren might be in trouble. I would appreciate it greatly if you could find him for me. You may also wish to ask Francis for help if you can reach him. The investigators must decide. Choose one. Professor Warren Rice was last seen working late at night in the Humanities Department of Miskatonic University. Let's search for him there. You can then proceed to Scenario 1A, Extracurricular Activity, if you wish to find Professor Warren Rice first. Dr. Francis Morgan was last seen gambling at the Clover Club, an upscale speakeasy and gambling joint located downtown. Let's go talk to him. Proceed with scenario 1B. The house always wins if you wish to find Dr. Francis Morgan first. So for this one, your first scenario is just you can decide. You can either do extracurricular activity or the house always wins. I think I'm going to go ahead and do the house always wins first. So I'll go ahead and place that now. Let you see this little fancy scripting effect there. And I'm going to go ahead and call it here. So next time we will go through the intro for the house always wins and see if we can get ourselves through this entire scenario, this entire campaign. So I am the Depressed Dealer. This was Arkham Horror for Arkham Horror, the card game for Dunwich Legacy, and I'll see you guys next time.